Hi everyone, my name is Heather Roach. I'm a clarinetist and new music specialist, and today I'm going to be taking you through everything you need to know about the clarinet, especially in terms of extended techniques. And I always put sort of scare quotes around extended when I talk about this, because we're not generally talking about an actual extension of the instrument. We're going to be talking about things that the instrument is naturally capable of. So I don't really like this term, but it is in common usage. So we're going to cover a lot of things today, as you can see on this slide. Everything from articulation to different kinds of multiphonics to glissandi, microtonality, etc. But let's start a little bit with the basics in terms of how the clarinet works. So the clarinet is a closed pipe, unlike a flute, which is an open. And it's also got a cylindrical bore, unlike a saxophone, which has got a conical bore. What this means, the critical part of this, is that the clarinet, in its harmonic spectrum, it only produces odd harmonics, which means that octaves aren't part of the clarinet sort of natural harmony. I think this is particularly relevant because it means that if you put the clarinet in octaves with anything, but especially other clarinets, they never sound in tune, even when they are. They're always just going to sound a little bit weird. So in terms of kind of day-to-day orchestration, that's a big tip that I can give you, is try not to put clarinets in octaves, because it makes life very stressful and it just never sounds in tune. So the clarinet functions by the vibration of the reed. The reed's quite bendy, and the oscillation caused by airflow from the player produces sound. So the reed will then amplify any kind of interruption to this oscillation, either by using the tongue or changing the airflow in some other way, and this is how we produce different kinds of articulations. And also it's important that dynamics is not just a matter of blowing harder or softer. It's combined with this different kind of pressure that we put on the mouthpiece. And here, this slide shows the different ranges of different clarinets. These are all transposed. They're written in both written pitches and sounding for you. These are fairly standard orchestral ranges. So, for example, with the bass clarinet, my practical range goes quite a bit higher than that A that's written there. So on a reasonable day, I can get up to an F or an F sharp above that. Also worth noting that the written pitches for the bass and contrabass clarinets there are still in the treble clef, even though they are an octave or 2 octaves below the clarinet's range. That's because the fingering system of the clarinet stays the same. So it's much easier for us if you just put everything in treble clef, even though I understand that it seems a little bit weird when you're working with these bass instruments to use it, but everything in treble clef and transposed properly. Also very important that when you transpose your parts, if you're using Sibelius or Finale or whatever, you make sure that it doesn't automatically put a key signature in, unless your music unless you're writing kind of more tonal music in keys, because sort of it'll put an F sharp and a C sharp obviously into the transposition and then remove them every time, and it gets very confusing when I'm trying to read. Also, when you're writing chamber music, please supply your clarinettist with a transpose score, because I generally play chamber music from the score now, and I think a lot of people do. So many of us are using iPads and the like to perform from, and I like to know what my colleagues are doing, especially with contemporary music, where it's not, the rhythms are sometimes going to be more complicated, and it's really helpful to know what they're doing. I've also listed here some of the sort of famous clarinet repertoire from before the 21st century, because I think it's really helpful to get an idea of the lyric and virtuosic capabilities of the instrument, just in terms of what works well for kind of jumping around, what works well for articulation, You know, the scores are all going to be on IMSLP, so you can kind of have a sort of basic familiarity with what the clarinet can do, and then move on to kind of more exciting things. I think that's the best way to learn that stuff, so get to it. I've also got some playlists on my Spotify account, so if you click that link, I'll put it below, then you can find those as well if you want to hear those pieces easily. Okay, so let's move on to articulation. So so the first sort of basic thing, legato versus staccato tonguing. Basically, what if you don't write anything, if you don't put it as a sort of slur mark over, like a slur mark over will. If you don't put anything, or if you put kind of maybe tenuto, then you're going to get something more like. So basically, I'm tonguing at the beginning of each note, and staccato, on the other hand, I'll use my tongue at both beginning and the end of each note. So I start and stop the pitch with the tongue, like that. Double tonguing is also an option. Generally, composers don't write this in unless they really know what they're doing, because I will generally only use it when my single tongue isn't fast enough. I've got quite a slow single tongue compared to a lot of players, so I do rely on the double tongue a lot of the time. But Kagel in this score, Schattenklange, fantastic piece actually. I think there's a really good recording of it on Spotify as well, if you want to hear the whole thing. He does use it. So you see in the third measure, he puts these double dots under each note, and that's signifying double tongue. This piece is for bass clarinet. So he kind of writes this. And where he writes S, those are slap tongues, but we'll get to those in a second. So the next thing is bit of flutter tongue. Flutter tongue is basically, I just do a kind of this sort of R sound with my tongue. It does have some limitations, because if you start to go into the higher register, you'll find it starts to break. And I can make up for that a little bit with dynamics. If I play really loud, it won't break. And if I play very quietly, you can get these lovely underblown multiphonic sounds, which I really like. Tongue on reed is a kind of sort of old jazzer technique where basically I smush my entire tongue on the reed. So if I play normally, it sounds like. Again, this works better in sort of lower registers, but I kind of like the sound. It's got that sort of 1940s saxophone sound. So vibrato, another very important technique, of course, but clarinetists won't use it automatically. We don't play with vibrato in general, so you have to ask for it. You know, you could write something like light vib over a note, or if you want it throughout your whole score, kind of vibrate throughout, whatever. Stockhausen, for example, he does quite a lot of writing in rhythmic vibrato, so I might not play that B in its octave because I'll blow out my microphone, but an octave below, you can see in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7th bar of that, he has this kind of that's quite effective. And then finally, slap tongue. So slap tongue, I make a slap tonguing sound, by putting the tongue on the reed and then releasing it, and it pulls back, snaps against the mouthpiece, and this creates a kind of vacuum release sound, I guess. So there are a few different ways you can write this, actually. If you just write slap, I'll kind of make something up based on what's going on in the music. but you can also be really specific. So I can do it without adding any pitch, i.e. without breathing at the same time. You can see that saying without pitch doesn't really make any sense because there's still definitely pitch. But with pitch, I would mean with air. And you can also write open slaps. You need to make sure there's a little bit of space before and after because I'm actually really going to open my mouth. And that makes a really kind of explosive sound. Another fun thing is if I use a multiphonic fingering, and we're going to talk about multiphonics a bit later, you get a really nice kind of chord. Now for a few examples. So this is a piece by the Swedish composer Johan Svensson, who I work with quite a lot. I'll put the link to the full recording of this fantastic ensemble piece in below. So you can see it's quite complicated to explain what he does here because there's so many different kinds of notation in the score. So the slap tongue notation, he uses this big triangle. It's sort of the third beat of the first measure there. The first one is actually a combination of key clicks on the bottom and air sound and then a kissing sound on the top, which we haven't really talked about, but sounds a bit like that. So, and then goes a little bit like that. It's worth checking out the whole piece. He's a really great composer. Another example is this piece by David Lang called Press Release. He actually doesn't specify that you should use slap tongue, but it's sort of become common performance practice that people do slap all of the forte notes that are happening on the bottom there. And you hear if I don't do it, it just doesn't have the same kind of pop, so it really adds something. I like it better with the slap. I mean, the only thing to be careful with, I find, is if I've got too much slap to do in one piece, this piece would definitely fit that category. I do sometimes start to cut my tongue a little bit. Not something really to worry about, but because when the music's good, you can accept a small amount of pain. But anyway, moving on. So another nice one is teeth tone. Most of these things, by the way, are possible on all the clarinets. I'm just kind of switching back and forth based on what the example is going to be, and just to give you an idea across the board. So teeth tone, I basically, normally when I play, I've got my bottom lip covering my teeth. But if I just put my teeth against the reed, I get these very fine, high pitches, which generally work better at quiet dynamics, but they're never really going to sound quiet because they're so high. Nice example here from the composer Carola Bauckholt from her Klarinettentrio. So in the measure before 10, she has these sort of little like tree symbols, which she uses to show the teeth tones in different registers. So she's never specifying pitches because I can't really control it, but I can control a little bit up and down. So she has this kind of funny waltz here. Very cute. The triangles there with the lines, those are air sounds with flutter, so it's just works really nicely. Another piece to check out. I'm not sure if there's a recording online actually. I'll have a look and put a link in if there is. Yeah, so The next thing we're going to talk about very, very briefly is key clicks. And the only thing to keep in mind is that unlike on something like the saxophone, which has got a really heavy mechanism, key clicks on the clarinet are really quite quiet. On the bass clarinet, they're slightly louder. You've got more options because you've got more metal to work with here. But it's just worth keeping in mind that no matter how hard I hit them, they're not going to be very loud. And if you're going to write music with other players, or if you're writing, if you're writing for orchestra, you may as well forget it unless you're going to amplify it. And some people have done quite interesting things with amplified key click sounds because they are quite heavily pitched. They're just very quiet. I think that's all I have to say about that. You could go into a lot of detail with key clicks, but we don't have time to do that today. So let's move on to a little bit of chat about multiphonics. If you're really interested in multiphonics, I'm in the middle of a sort of year and a half, well, it's been extended now because of COVID, project with McLaughlin, and we've got a load of really interesting videos that explain multiphonics in all sorts of different ways. I'll put some links down below again for you to check those out if you're interested. Otherwise, I'll just sort of explain very briefly how things work. So we're basically going to be looking at two different kinds of multiphonics. One is fingered and one is spectral. So how it works is basically every fingering on the clarinet can produce a multiphonic. And it just depends on what I'm doing here, what I'm doing with the air, and how the fingering works. So a fingered multiphonic basically creates holes in the airstream. So this, for example, makes this multiphonic. And what happens is you create a hole in the airstream here and a hole in the airstream here, and it creates these conflicting airstreams within the instrument, and they back and forth between each other very quickly, and we can't hear that as our ears can't hear it quickly enough to hear that difference, so we just hear it as a chord. What I would call a spectral multiphonic involves using, say, quote unquote, normal clarinet fingering and overblowing it. To have that kind of effect. Anytime you have a fingered multiphonic, you need to have the fingering diagram. You can't just write a chord and expect me to know, because there are, hundreds of different combinations, and I don't have them memorized, and no clarinetist does. So what I would recommend doing is checking out some of the posts on my blog. I'll put some links below. I've put a few in the slide here as well. A really good place to start, if you want to write a piece that any clarinetist can play, is to start with my charts of easy multiphonics, because I've sort of crowdsourced those through getting dozens of clarinet players to check them out, and found a bunch of really easy ones that work even if you're writing for school-aged players, amateurs, whatever. Those ones are going to work. Some of them are more difficult. So if you check out my post on dia and multiphonics, we'll talk about them a bit more in a second. Yeah, here you can see I've got so many different posts about multiphonics. And one of the things that I've been really interested in over the years is not just creating like big charts, because that's sort of traditionally how it's done. You get one big chart with 300 different multiphonics, and you get a little CD and you kind of listen to them and figure out what you want to do. But to categorize them a little bit more interestingly, a little bit more based on their color, or based on what kind of pitches they can produce or what they can do. So I really recommend just going into the blog posts and listening to different things and seeing if something inspires you. Yeah, so here's a little bit more information about spectral multiphonics. So with the spectral ones, you do not need to provide a fingering diagram, because they are all overblown by a fundamental. You can just write overblow. They can be very loud with clearly defined pitches. So you can sort of hear that generally the overtones in the multiphonic follow the harmonic series, kind of, but everything's quite irregular and out of tune. So it's worth looking at. I've got charts that show the pitches if you're interested in specific pitches. If you're not, you can do something like what Chris Fox has done here in his Straight Lines and Broken Times. There's a recording on Spotify of this if you're curious. So you can see top of the second page, for example, he's got these big lines that kind of swoop around. So they're just basically showing this kind of thing. So it's very easy to write this way if that's what you're interested. I also really like this sound, these multiphonics when they're done quietly. Kind of like this just whispery multiphonic sound, which I think is nice. The loud one, I mean, there was a time when everybody was writing this sound all the time. I think it kind of peaked in the early 2000s, and it's just become, yeah, it was that sort of classic clarinet new music sound for a while. So a nice example of this on the B-flat clarinet comes from a fantastic piece by the Croatian composer Sara from her Sugarcoating number 2. And there's a really good recording of this with the score on YouTube, which I'll put the link to below. So she basically switches between teeth tone and spectral multiphonic in this kind of repetitive way that matches the repetitive actions in the other parts, and it works quite well. When you're always coming back to this thing, so it's quite easy to repeat that sort of action. Once you sort of get used to it. I haven't played that for years. Okay, another really popular multiphonic, and they're very beautiful, so it's easy to understand why, are what are generally called the dyad multiphonics. And these ones, basically, they're kind of anomaly within the system whereby you can produce tones that are very close to each other. Beautiful. I've got a whole bunch of charts for them, so I'll put links to those below. And here are a few examples. This is a piece by Martin René Bauck that was written for me years ago now. I love this piece. There's a recording on Spotify. I think there are 2 recordings on Spotify now. And the very end of the piece, the whole piece just uses these multiphonics, and it's sort of 18 minutes long. Very nice to listen to, very tiring to play. And yeah, I'll just play a little bit from maybe 142. See how we go. It's been a while for this as well. So see, it's really easy to create these lovely kind of chorales of multiphonics. Another good piece to check out if you're interested in this kind of thing is a piece by Swedish composer Liza for clarinet and cello. It's also, I think it's an extraordinary piece. A lot of kind of thin harmonics in the cello combined with diode multiphonics in the clarinet, and then these just absolutely screaming loud high note sections. It's yeah, be careful if you're listening to this one on headphones, but it's fantastic. Also on Spotify, I think. And finally, a piece by the British composer Rebecca Saunders. I keep saying these pieces are fantastic, but it's because I picked them for this lecture. So, but you're basically getting all of my favourite repertoire here. So she does some really amazing things with these multiphonics because she spent a long time working very closely with the clarinettist that she wrote this for. So she does all sorts of things like in the, it's hard to see in the measures, but you can see where that sort of G quarter flat comes in. So she's got the diode multiphonic trilling to a low E flat, which I do basically by taking off one key. And then at the same time I should also kind of overblow a little bit so that we get this high note. And then we switch to another one. She also does a really good job of using in-breathing air sounds to sustain a really long line. I think it's really important that you keep in mind that I do need to breathe. And sometimes circular breathing is an option, but a lot of times it isn't. If it's in the high register, if it's really leapy, I can't really circular breathe effectively while continuing to play. So she's done this in this really sneaky way, where you see in the last two bars in this, we get this kind of, I've forgotten what all the trills are now, but so you're gradually coming in after taking a breath as part of the piece. I think that's really effective, really good idea. Another nice thing you can do is use these multiphonic trills. This is a technique that was very often first used by a composer from Italy called Sciarrino. So basically what I'm doing is using a normal kind of fundamental pitch, so here a low C, and I'm removing one key, so I'm removing the thumb key quite high up, and then just letting things overblow. And you just get this hint of this top note. So Sciarrino wrote this piece for B flat clarinet. Actually, for the super geeks, he wrote it for a full bone system B flat clarinet. So you can see the first note is a low E flat, which I don't have on this instrument, but I can at least give you an idea. And he does some nice things where he puts these arrows to show gradual pitch emerging. And he also does things, so you can see underneath he writes rapido and misurato, so like super fast and then kind of measured in tempo. Yeah, a really beautiful piece. Loads of recordings of this. I'm sure you can find one on YouTube with the score if you want to check it out. Okay, so moving on. Glissandi. Okay, so glissandi, especially going upwards is always easier. If you want a wide glissandi on the clarinet, stick to the B flat clarinet and keep it start in the second register. So from the D, like fourth line D. Because then I've got, what I do is a combination of what happens here and what happens here. So I'm doing whatever I'm doing here, I can't really explain to you in the time we have, but I'm kind of peeling off while I do this magic with my embouchure. Okay, so you can sort of hear a bit of Rhapsody in Blue in there already. Downward bends are a little bit more limited because I'm just doing this with my embouchure. And the higher I am, so when I'm on my high C here, I can get probably a fourth or a fifth if I'm in really good shape. But if I'm in the lowest register, say on the low F, I'm a lot more limited. I hope that's a really like basic introduction. There are a lot of exceptions to this rule, and I've written a bit about Glissandi, so I'll put that down below, but you can see the link is also there. With the bass clarinet, large sweeps below the high altissimo range are not really possible because you can see, like, I can't do this motion when there's all of this mechanics in the way. So in the high register I can kind of cheat because the higher I am, the harmonics are closer and closer together. So I can kind of make it up. It's still a little bit sloppy. It's never going to sound like a string. Like, just, I would give up on any ideas of clarinet glissandi being like string glissandi because it's just never gonna be quite that. What I really love in the bass clarinet is really slow glissandi in the low register, like half a tone or a tone at the most. Because I'm just sneaking the key off there, and I can kind of make it work. I think that's nice. You do need a little bit of extra air to make glissandi happen, especially with the B flat clarinet. So that big sweep that I did for you, I need to be at least a kind of mezzo forte for that. But if you want more information, yeah, check out the link. Okay, so now on to microtonality. So microtonal color fingerings are available for basically any pitch on the clarinet. There are a few exceptions, but you'd be quite unlucky to pick one. The main region to avoid is the really the low range, so up to about there, because there's nothing to put down for these color fingers. But after that, there's all sorts of nice things you can do if you want to do little trills or the like. So a few ways to write that. So here's Australian composer Liza, and she's written in all of the fingerings for her color fingerings. You can see across the top there. So it sounds a little bit like. Really beautiful, I think, how she manages to get this line. But that kind of writing would be difficult to do without working quite intensely with the player. She's got another bit, you can see she uses a lot of quarter tones, and basically everything in this piece works really well, so it's worth checking out if you're interested in this. Just trying to think which, oh yeah, so she, up at the top, she's got more. Lots of little, there's a nice little bend glissando at the end there. That's a really nice way to write it. I think it looks really beautiful as well. I love her handwriting. So clear and so evocative, I think. Another way to do it is, so this piece by Trevor Baccia uses numbers to show different color fingerings. So the color fingerings are up to me. So I can just sort of, okay, I've got an F, what are the options? I can kind of work them out, assign a number to each one and move from there, and then go on to the next pitch. So it requires a little bit of like a little bit of homework from the clarinet player before you can start practicing, but it works really well. Yes, the rhythms are crazy in this piece. Finally, another way to do it, who is this piece by? David. Oh, his name's gone straight out of my head. I'll put it in the link below. Sorry, David. So he's basically put rhythms for different color fingerings. So the you basically have three options. You have a kind of, he's got this normal note, and then he's got a kind of triangle symbol, and they show two different ways. So if you want to be a little bit more rhythmic about it, that's a really good way to go. So I'm racing through here, but I'm kind of assuming that since you can pause and rewind, and if you're interested, you can watch something again. Right, okay, so another thing to think about is agility if you're going to write in quarter tones. There are a lot of ways you can get around this if you want to write quite fast things. So Koumara, in her piece Walk In and Find Your Supper, there's a recording of this on YouTube. It's quite a theatrical piece. You can sort of see towards the end of the first page, and my annotations are left in from our the last time I performed this. It actually says to look at the violinist. In fact, it says to look at Stephanie or to look at Heather, because the piece was written for us, and we're kind of playing characters based on our real characters. But she also writes very tricky quarter tone passages, which are made easier by the fact that they always kind of hover around each other. So you can see the clarinet the quarter tone passages never get super leapy, which means that even though they took me a little while to learn, because the quarter tone fingerings are quite not strange, they're always related to normal clarinet fingerings, but because we learn them, you learn your normal clarinet fingerings when you're 14, and then you learn your quarter tone fingerings 10 years later, and it just gets harder for stuff to go in. And you don't use them every day, I guess. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. The point is, you can, if you keep things in the same range like this, that's a big help. That makes it a lot easier. Okay, this is not easy. This is from Brian Ferneyhough's time and motion study for bass clarinet. It's not supposed to be easy. Not everything is supposed to work. And it's very leapy and very difficult, and but it's great to get an idea of sort of, what is theoretically possible, because there's nothing here that doesn't work. It's just sort of, the problem is trying to do it all at once. It's a great score though, it's beautiful. Another way to do it, here's a nice example of a text score by Scott McLaughlin, who's working with me on this amazing Multiphonics project. I won't say too much about this. If you're sort of interested in how the score works, you can hit pause now and have a read through. His text scores are very clear, and there's also a recording of me playing it live in Leeds from many years ago on YouTube. Another way to end up with microtonality is to have it appear as the result of your compositional process. A nice example of that is from Pedro Alvarez. Now the score is a little bit tricky to get one's head around, but I'll try to explain it. So the notes on the bottom that are in black are the sort of core fingerings. So the C sharp and G sharp that appear there with sort of black dots in the middle of them are actually signifying keys that I'm opening. So the C sharp key is here, and the G sharp key is here. As a result of that, because I'm opening holes higher up. So he creates kind of rhythmic material through the opening and closing. Where it says M above, that's also a multiphonic, so I'll just play this a little bit slowly. So you get the idea. I really love this material, and I mean, obviously he's been specific about the pitches. We spent a long time kind of working out what happens when you play this and then you open this and blah blah blah. And yeah, it works really well. And it's really, once you get used to the notation, it works very well. He hasn't kind of reinvented the wheel here. Another nice one is this piece by the Italian composer Zeno Baldi, whose name is not at the top of his score for whatever reason, but I'll write it down below. So here what's happening is the A on the bottom tells me what I'm playing here, and the F sharp just means to release the thumb key. So we get a similar kind of color fingering approach to Liza limbs at the beginning of the microtonality section. I think there's a recording of this that's just come out with another clarinet player. So that would be worth checking out. No, it came out about 6 months. It should be on Spotify. Finally, the last thing for microtonality is to create a kind of clarinet scordatura. So Grise does this in his Vortex Temporum, which is such a great piece if you don't know it. And all he does is he has the flute and the clarinet playing together, but he asks the clarinet player to pull out the barrel. Kind of have to pull a lot of things out just to make space. And if I can do a kind of compare, so you can really get down about a quarter tone, and that was fairly, I should have pulled out a few other things. It works really well, very much worth checking out his score. It's surprising how well it does do the quarter tone, even though I'm pulling out in a specific place. It's not even across the instrument. It does actually work pretty well, and it makes it a lot easier. Can you imagine if I had to do strange quarter tone fingerings for all of those notes? And it's really fast as well. That kind of thing. Check out the recording. You have so much homework to do after this. Oliver Leith does the same thing. Basically, in his piece, he actually goes the other way, so 10 cents sharp, which means I need to find a shorter barrel to get a bit higher. But it's similar technique, just to sort of put me off the cello a little bit. Okay, so next thing, we're almost through here. So using the voice. So you can sing and play at the same time. A nice thing to do is if I sing and play kind of near, if I sing near where I'm playing, you get a kind of nice fuzzy distortion on the sound. Different composers have used this in all sorts of different ways. So George Aperghis, Greek composer, he writes so sound and murmuring. And he also does these fun like screaming multiphonics. So if you see at the bottom of this example, you go from quiet into multiphonic. And that works quite well. Get multiphonic fingering and just scream. Another good one is Canadian composer Thierry Tidro's Clarinettable. So here at A, you'll see he asks for maximizing the beating between the voice and the instrument. And then in measure 30, we hit the C with the clarinet and then change to the D or to the G but leaving the voice where it is. And so you can really hear these clear pitches. He also does a lot of stuff where it's basically kind of improvised, where you're sort of gradually kind of following the clarinet. You can get quite a wild thing. I probably killed my microphone there, but anyway. And he also does some nice things in really soft dynamics. So you can really hear these intervals when I'm playing quietly. A bit tricky if there are other people involved, because it's very easy to cover up the voice, because I can't sing as loud as I can play, and I can't sing and play at different dynamics, if that makes sense. So the max, if I'm doing max clarinet, I'm doing max voice as well, but it's still not going to be as loud as, I hope that sort of makes sense. If you think about it for a second, it'll make sense. The other thing is, singing and playing is quite hard on the throat, because I'm pushing quite hard to play the clarinet at the same time. It's not like normal singing, so try not to have too much of this material. And try to give me some reference points when you have it. So like where this E, and then the B comes in, you know, I'm holding the E so I can think of the pitch. It's quite difficult, for whatever reason, to play and pitch match correctly. It takes me a lot of practice, because it just doesn't seem to sit in my vocal cords where it should. I don't know why. I mean, I've talked to other players about this and they also have the same problem. That is the end of our presentation. That's certainly the end of the slides that I've got for you today. I'm happy for you to leave questions in the comments if you'd like me to answer something or something wasn't clear. Do feel free to leave me a comment. I'll try to get back to you within 24 hours or so, because normally when we do this workshop, I'm there with you and you can ask all the questions you like. I really don't bite. I hope that's clear. I hope you enjoy writing for the clarinet. I hope I didn't completely bombard you with too many scores and things to check out. I hope you just find something. I mean, the best advice I can offer you is to find one thing about the instrument that really interests you in terms of extended techniques, and to just try to explore that one thing as much as you can, rather than trying to do a lot of everything. Those always make the best pieces, and it's probably a little bit more fun to just kind of get into one aspect of it rather than just getting completely overwhelmed with all sorts of things. So all the best, and see you soon.